Thank you.
Representative Decker.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Commissioner, for being here today. I want to echo a little bit about what I've heard today from a different angle a little bit, but I'm passionate about public school excellence. I have spent about a decade of my life serving on site-based councils. My parents were both teachers. My children got a world-class education in Shelby County, and that was even before our new excellent superintendent. But what I want is for all across the state to have the same access to excellence. So in thinking about why teachers are leaving, listening to your presentation, there was a study last year that came out of Midwestern teachers. I've shared this with my superintendent. I shared it with Jim Flynn as well. It was asking teachers why they're leaving, because we want to know. We don't want to guess, as we've talked about. So the number one issue was discipline, lack of support in discipline matters. I'm kind of forgetting, too, salary was not it may have been third, I think it was on farther down. And then they went back to the same people and said, what if you had the salary you think is sufficient? What would you do? And they said, quit because of discipline. And by the way, among the top three, I believe, was being required to carry out woke political agendas. That was in the top. So when I go to your website, I'm sometimes just amazed at the woke agenda there, honestly. And I've seen the letter that Representative talked about a minute ago, and I've talked to teachers about that. So the teachers that I've talked to don't like that directive, but it comes from you. So I'm just concerned, and I wonder why your presentation does not talk about these other things. We've talked about them here. By the way, I can't find that on the web anymore on the site, but I've sent it to 2 or 3 people. But you say you will take that into consideration and think about it, but this can't be news. I mean, I'm really shocked that we're not talking about it here today, and I would beg you to think about it more and to think about your directives in this area, which are above teacher pay for many teachers who say, I quit because of this. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative Decker. You raise an interesting point around the impact of total compensation. I think when studies that have been done on the motivation of educators, they're primarily driven by what's called public service motivation or altruism. They want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to contribute to society. So that's their primary driver. But they're also human beings, and they respond to financial incentives. And having a pay level that's has an attractive starting wage, support toward a middle-class standard of living, and retirement with dignity, I think is something that we should all be supportive of. So while pay may not be the primary driver, it is a factor. And it is an important factor in how we attract and retain teachers. And if we don't attend to total compensation, you will end up with predictable labor market issues. I don't have any woke directives from the Department of Education. If you're referring to the transgender student pronoun guidance, it's guidance. In other words, it doesn't have the force of law. But the problems and challenges that people are dealing with in our schools relate to discipline issues. They relate to recovery from COVID, academic disruptions. They relate to lack of support at schools. The people who are making pronouns and transgender issues and woke issues a priority in our education are politicians. They are not the things that are in our schools.
Jason Glass is 100% correct here. This is not an issue that our teachers are spending a lot of time on. This is not something standing in the way of teaching our kids. This is not something that occupies a lot of their time. This is something that has been raised into a political issue by a coordinated effort from the Republican Party. And it started a few years ago with transgender bills, CRT, and now has morphed into this year's legislation on drag queens, controversial books, and transgender healthcare. And we know it's a coordinated effort because we see the same bills cropping up across the country in the same time period. We see the same talking points from our legislators. We see the same witnesses coming forward. And if you followed House Bill 470, Senate Bill 150, there were very few people from Kentucky who testified, none of them from any of the major medical organizations within the state. The people that did testify were from out of state, including a gentleman from a hate group who was brought in by Jennifer Decker. It's a group that has been dedicated to attacking the LGBTQ community from a medical perspective. They're all doctors who seeking political ends rather than doing no harm. So it is a political effort. The guidance that Jason Glass issued is innocuous, basically. It's if you looked at it, I challenge you to find any major concern with it other than perhaps those letters in the guidance. It advises teachers on how to be polite, considerate, think about the child's interest. And sometimes that child's interest may include if they come to you with something and say they're concerned about how their parents will react if they tell them, that you need to consider how you're going to respond to that. If a child is at fear for their coming out, creating an issue with their parents, I don't think any teacher wants to cause a child harm by bringing it up and seeing that end. It's not to say every parent's going to do that, but there's a fear, and there are plenty of stories from transgender youth, gay youth, even questioning youth in the past of being tossed from their homes, abused, ostracized, or their relationship drastically changing with their parents. So it is a valid concern, and it's one that teachers just can't dismiss and wing it. This is guidance to try and keep them from having to wing it, because you're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. It also suggests to parents that they should, suggests to teachers that if there is any evidence that a child may do something to cause themselves harm, that you need to alert the parents immediately. If it suggests, if they mention, well, I'm going to run away, well, then yeah, you need to notify the parents. There's no teacher going into these kids and saying, you know what, you should probably go have surgery immediately. You should not talk it over with your parents. You should not, you should just do whatever you want. These are teachers who are caught in a sensitive spot and want to be compassionate, caring, and have some advice for when it does crop up. I don't know why anybody would be opposed to that. Seems like to me a lot more harm could come to kids if we don't have guidance to this effect. So, last thing I want to point out is Jennifer Decker, who talks a lot here about how she wants first-class education for kids. And I wish we had first-class education for our legislators, because Jennifer Decker is either an idiot, and I know that's not kind, or she's a purposeful idiot. She has spent this session playing up studies that she has falsely represented, including a Swedish study that didn't recommend against care for our youth and didn't say it was not helpful. It said more follow-up care would be beneficial and that more study needed to be done, both of which I think are acceptable responses and should be something that she mentioned, but she didn't. In this instance, she points to a survey that you can't find on the internet anymore, at least not in the location where it was originally published. I found a reference to it that links to it and found that it was a dead page when I clicked through the link. But it came from someone from a right-wing source, which a lot of this does. There's this coordinated effort among a lot of AstroTurf groups and media sources that have been created just to spread this information. It points to a survey done by Tony Kinnett, who is with the Chalkboard Review, now with the Heritage Foundation. And the survey itself is a series of questions, including a loaded question about, did you leave because of progressive politics? And it mentions, helpfully, CRT, gender identity, and diversity initiatives. There's no indication as to who this survey went to, how they were selected. Was it done randomly? Was it a list of people who followed him on a blog or something? It's not clear. So I'm sure his results are accurate. I just don't know that they have any value. And an educated person would look at this survey and go, there's probably some inherent bias in here that's, it makes it tough to say is valid. But it just frustrates me because Jennifer Decker, if she really wanted to improve education, she would focus on education. And she would understand that the guidance of Jason Glass does not replace anything else he's doing. It doesn't do anything to harm our kids. What does harm our kids is a continual focus on denying our parents the rights to help them, and a continual focus on demonizing subsets of our kids. Plus a continual focus on attacking our educators who are trying their level best to do every single thing that society can't do, that governments won't concern themselves about. I find this continued lunacy, this focus on supposedly education by uneducated or purposely ignorant legislators is just disturbing. Jason Glass is a decent person from every teacher I've talked to. People that work with him like him. He seems to be a good guy. He certainly is better and less politically motivated than his predecessor. His installation as commissioner was by a board that certainly was less politically motivated than the previous board. And I plenty of evidence pointing to that, and I'll share if anybody wants it. But just wanted to share this video, and I apologize for talking too long. But if you stayed, I appreciate it. And I hope that you will push back on these efforts by people like Jennifer Decker, David Mead, and others to push ignorance and hate in our communities. Thanks.